Welcome to the Better You podcast. My name is Ian Bickle and I want to help you create a happier, healthier, more energized and successful version of you. The Better You podcast is all about exploration and growth. I'll be speaking to people that can give us lessons and principles we can apply to our own lives. I want to empower, educate and give you the freedom, energy, mindset and autonomy for you to take back control of your life. Thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe, share and leave a kind review so we can share the positivity. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the podcast, or welcome to the podcasts, because we are doing a bit of a collective one here. It's going to get thrown up on mine, the Better You podcast, and the Men's Intuition podcast. I am joined with the wonderful Jeff Ash. Hello, Jeff. Oh, we're joined together.
Hey,
how do you introduce these things, Jeff?
For those listening to the Men's Intuition podcast, I am joined by the wonderful and talented Ian Bickle. So,
thank you. What an introduction to one another we just made.
Yes,
confusing everyone, bamboozling from the off. We thought would be a super great video and something that maybe, because I've got a couple of double episodes with Jeff looking at the principles of intuitive eating, which is great. So I do ask people to go back and listen to that. But we wanted just to start about, like, how do we even get started with intuitive eating? And sometimes it's nice. Jeff's got loads of resources on his podcast, maybe going down different, like, kind of rabbit holes. But sometimes it can just be nice to go back a little bit to the very beginning, maybe to reinforce some things, but also maybe for people who are interested in this world, but kind of not sure of where to even get started. How do we even begin answering a question like that, Jeff? Well, you're going to take us away with it.
Great. I know that's a hard question to answer, really, because in some ways, because and I think when I hear people talk about reading the book Intuitive Eating, where they read about all the principles and there's examples throughout the book, which it's a great book. I highly recommend people read it. But a lot of people, the complaint is, okay, the book's fantastic, but I still am not sure where to start. How do I get going on this? Because as we kind of talked about before we started recording, it's 10 principles. It's not like a diet that you start, which I think a lot of people are used to. You start the keto diet. So what do? You cut out all your carbs and you eat tons of fat. And so you have like these rules that you follow. Or if you're counting calories, you get a target and maybe certain macro percentages, and then you start using an app, and the app tells you when you're supposed to eat. If you're still under your target, then you keep eating. If you hit your target, then you have to stop. And so there's, it kind of tells you how to get started, what to do. But with intuitive eating, it's like, well, here's 10 principles, and you can't do all of them at one time. You want to eventually get to where you've incorporated all 10 principles into your life. But how do you start? Do you start with number 1? Do you start with number 5? Do you try and work in the smidgen of each? How do you do that? And so it's actually a challenging thing, which is, of course, why I think it's important. And if you have the means, that you work with a coach like Ian or myself, because we can help you kind of understand that starting point. But I will say this, I know one of the key areas that a lot of people start with is rejecting the diet mentality. I mean, that's the first principle, and it's for a reason, because it's basically starting off with this idea that, okay, I'm not going to do things in the same way that I've been doing them in the past, which is to restrict my food intake to certain foods, certain amounts of foods, certain nutrients, that kind of thing, or engage in excessive exercise that's like prescribed, not to me as an individual, but sort of on a, you're going to work out 5 days a week now, and you're going to eat these number of calories, and that kind of a approach. So I think that rejecting the diet mentality is one place to start. How do you help people do that?
I think this dieting, reject the diet mentality is, like, obviously the first principle. And as people listen to the audiobook or read the book, they'll notice how like all of the other principles kind of almost they always circumnavigate back to that rejected diet mentality, and always kind of feeding back to why, you know, that first principle kind of underpins them all. And if you are kind of plagued continuously with diet thoughts, and it will get in the way, and it will almost hijack all of the other principles, because like, how can you honor your hunger when you have all of these mixed messages about the types of foods or the amounts of foods that you are allowed to eat or you should eat, you know, that language. And that's often the biggest stumbling block from a chronic dieter's perspective, right? Is that they've conditioned themselves to think that there has to be conditions attached to their eating patterns. So when intuitive eating comes about, it's essentially having this freedom. And I think so many people struggle with that amount of freedom because they've lost so much trust in themselves, and their interpretation of that word is that they are just going to eat to the point of, you know, gluttony, or like and obviously a lot of people coming into this might still have this overall desire to change their body shape and weight. So there's a lot of fear around there. So for me, it's getting people to, I guess, look at the patterns, especially, you know, type of client I've been potentially working with, and likely the same as someone who's gone through years of this, like on, off, good, bad, right, wrong, you know, on the wagon, off the wagon. And you've got to go, well, what you've exhausted all resources, right? You've done all of the diet. What's next? You know, do you go back to what you call or perceived worked the last time? Yet here you are, potentially listening to this or talking to a coach, or even more lost and confused. What is the alternatives? And I think a lot of people fall into the trap believing that there is that one diet out there, right? That one thing. And you have to kind of get them to understand that life is ever shifting and ever flowing. Intuition is always, isn't it, right? But when people have lost that, it's about reconnecting with that. So I think rejecting that diet mentality is like a huge thing of going, you know what, right? It's almost like a clean slate. Now I've rejected the diet mentality. What next? What if I've just said, right, I'm done with this, going to these groups or doing these things. I've rejected that diet mentality, which isn't just like that, you know, it could take a little bit of time for it to feed out, but it's kind of like going from there. So with my people that I work with, like it's getting them to make that decision first and foremost to change. That's the biggest stepping stone, and getting them to step into that uncertainty, because diets have certainty attached to them, don't they? Whether it's like people think they like rules because rules offer like safety and security. And I think as well, if there is predictability around like outcomes, because that's what a lot of people are focused on. For example, the before and after pictures, especially if something's very culturally, I mean, humans are tribes, you know, we've got that tribe mentality, and it's security and safety in numbers. So if everybody does it, it offers that kind of extra layer. Whereas what intuitive eating kind of presents is this fear of the unknown, right?
Yeah.
But that's where kind of what humans want as well is freedom at a core level.
Yeah.
So we have to get people to make a decision to take an emotional risk. And that's where I think the big shift is. And I've also noticed that's what also gets people done, because they are still attached to that diet mentality at their heart. They may have said, oh yeah, I've rejected it, but they haven't truly internally done so.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it takes a long time, and I think most of us are still going to struggle with it to differing degrees at different times, and especially when we're going through different challenges in life and different life circumstances, those kinds of things, to reject that diet mentality because it's so prominent in our culture and it's just emphasized so much. But I think for me, one of the things I think is important, like in getting started with intuitive eating, is not feeling like, okay, I have to really nail this principle before I can move on. Because I think sometimes people can get hung up and spend way too much time focusing on any one of the principles and trying to almost perfect it in a sense, or get to where they think, okay, I've got this down, now I'm ready to move on. But rather, what I emphasize to people is, hey, stuff hasn't worked before, right? I mean, that's why you're checking into a completely different approach. And that's why when you heard a little bit about intuitive eating, you're like, ooh, that sounds kind of interesting. I want to check that out, because it doesn't sound like any other diet. It's not promising quick, fast weight loss. It's not promising that you're going to get jacked in 12 weeks or anything like that. And so what I usually do, and I think this would be a good place for people to start, is to say, just acknowledge that what I've been doing before hasn't been working for me. Maybe it works for some people, and that's why my friend who lost X amount of weight and has kept it off for the last 15 years, and his whole life has changed when he started that diet, why it worked for him, but it's not working for me. And that's so that rejecting the diet mentality can look as simple as, you know what, I'm just going to put weight loss on the back burner right now. I can't get to a place where I can just say wholeheartedly, I'm never going back. I'm never going to do it again. But just say, you know what, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to put it back there. I'm not going to weigh myself every day. Some simple things like that to try and stay away from getting hung up in that diet mentality, and just start with that simple acknowledgement that, hey, this isn't working, so I'm going to go ahead and give this another try. And then also acknowledging that it's that diet mentality that tends to interfere with these other principles, and start to recognize how when you're hung up with when you're focused on changing the size of your body, how that can interfere with recognizing hunger and fullness. Because it's really easy, when you're trying to lose weight, to say, well, am I really that hungry? No, I'm not really that hungry. I'm just a little hungry. And then am I full yet? Yeah, I'm full, even when we're just barely took the edge off of hunger. And so we're sort of straddling the fence between trying to not eat very much, but at the same time listening to our hunger. And I think that can be a really difficult place. So anyway, I think that's why that's a good place to start. But also, again, just kind of emphasizing, you don't have to perfect it. It's okay to still question that and still want the weight loss to occur, the body changes to occur. I mean, I think that's natural, and it'd be disingenuous to say, oh, you can just get to a place where you don't ever think about that, because I don't think that happens for most people.
Yeah, and I think people assume you use the word worked, and I always, when people say the word worked, I'm like, right, there's the quotations with the fingers going, because like people will look outwardly and assume like, everybody's got their stuff together, everybody's got their shit together, and they look at that person who, maybe has changed their body and lost weight doing a dietary system, but you don't see the other side of it. Like a lot of the clients, and I'm sure Jeff is the same, some of the clients that I've worked with, they don't need to change their body size. They are what is considered by society a healthy weight. A lot of people would go, oh, I'd kill to look like that, and
yeah,
if they made negative comments about their own body, people would be like, well, what do you mean? You're absolutely fine. So what's going on behind somebody's eyes and what they are doing can, and I think society have maybe considered things like it being disciplined, and somebody's got fantastic discipline, and there's a fine line between discipline and disorder, right? And if somebody's going to an extreme, if they're missing out on social events and they're scared to eat, and not eating foods that they don't know the macros of or the full ingredients of, does it have good or bad ingredients, how processed is it? Is Jeff's kind of drinking a can of Coke Zero? You know, like
Yep.
this sort of stuff really does play on the mind of people, and it gets in the way of their quality of life because they're almost kind of boxed in by it. And the fact is
Mhm.
now there's all this additional pressure of they are the fitness guy, they are the health person, they've got to keep up appearances. So for me, it is kind of not judging a book by a cover, not
Mhm.
building up a picture in your mind just based off the very limited evidence that you do have presented to you. They done X diet, they lost weight, that
Mhm.
worked. But it's like, yeah, but what about the rest? What about health as a whole? Not just the
Mhm.
physical aspect, which we don't know whether or not they are physically healthy because we don't have blood markers. We
Yeah.
we just got their appearance, and we assume smaller is better.
Mhm.
Um, but what about like their emotional health? What about the psychological health? What about the social health? And I know fine well, listen to your podcast, you talk about this all the time. So
Mhm.
this is where the nuance really comes into it. And intuitive eating is like a non-weight centered approach for that reason. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And there's, it kind of makes me think of one of the activities that I'll often have people do, and that's a how has dieting interfered with your life? And I think you've probably used that form or something similar before with people. So I know that's I got that resource from our intuitive eating certification training that both of us went through, and so I find that to be a nice, helpful thing to use because it helps you to identify those things. It doesn't tell you what to do about it, but I find with a lot of my clients that they don't necessarily need an answer to a question every time. That often they have a question or there's an issue, and sometimes just reflecting on things and acknowledging it is enough to say, "Wow, hadn't really thought about that." Now that I've acknowledged that, now I can start to look for other things that may be interfering, other things that I think are healthy but are in fact problematic, other behaviors that maybe I thought were virtuous or disciplined or helpful. They're really interfering with other aspects of my life. And so I think that can be a good place, when you're thinking about where to start, is start to say, that's just one question to ask yourself: how has dieting interfered with my life? And then start to ask, how's it interfered with my social life? How's it interfered with my physical, maybe my work life, financial life? Because some people, I've seen people say, Monday I'm starting my new lifestyle and I'm throwing out everything that's not organic or that's processed or whatever, and then so they start spending 3 times as much on their groceries. And some people can afford that. Maybe that's not an issue, but for some people, spending 3 times as much money on your groceries taps out your savings and those kinds of things. So there's all kinds of different ways that dieting can interfere with your life. And so I think that can be a great place to start. And that kind of goes along with all that stuff that you were saying, the all those different facets of health and how it's impacting you negatively. And it can be really helpful to reflect on those things.
Mm. And not just how has it affected your life, but also for how long.
Yeah.
Because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these things it does stem from the unknowing parents that in the generation that we grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
It was and how culture has changed in regards to the stigma attached with a person's physical appearance and
Mm-hmm.
throughout like pop culture, somebody in a bigger body was someone who was the butt of the jokes and considered, less of a human. And there's such a kind of ingrained, like, and that's what I think somebody in a bigger body really struggles with as well is it's not about the physical shape. It's what the sense of self-worth that they kind of carry with that in this world that is just so kind of transfixed on a person's
Hmm.
appearance. We can look at how, for example, the superheroes have changed depicted in films and comics,
Yeah.
and they've all done. And listen, I've competed within natural bodybuilding, and these people have been on the juice. These people have been taking stuff,
Yeah.
we look at like popular characters such as Wolverine, presented by Hugh Jackman, and these people who deny touching anything, and just for like legal reasons, I have no social evidence. Not that his lawyers will be listening to this, they might.
Yeah.
Hey Hugh, but these people, there's so many cloaks and mirrors in somebody's appearance. The amount of things that people can do in order to shift their body. And trust me, I come from a bodybuilding world, so I know
Hmm.
kind of, I haven't been in it, but I know the darker side of it. Well, I know a little bit, but I know nothing about it at the same time. Um, but I think with so much pressure put upon us as a society, it's almost hard to escape, like the
Hmm.
desire to look a certain way. Um, and this is where, like, where is the line where we're like kind of getting people to let go of that? Like,
Hmm.
where do we put the line in terms of people going, right, rejecting the diet mentality? Does that mean that people give up on weight loss? How do you kind of have that conversation with people?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I bring up when people are really struggling with that is reminding them, how has it worked for you in the past, focusing on the weight loss thing? How has that worked for you long term? And then also, I think it's good to ask the questions. Well, are there things that you are doing that are not helpful for your body? Are you doing things that are harmful to your body? So instead of saying, well, what can we do to shrink it? I say, well, what are some habits that you are or you're not doing, just that have nothing to do with whether your body changes in size, that we could work on? So I try and I do that for me a lot. One of the reasons I feel like I like to take that approach is that I'm in a smaller body. I mean, when I go to Kohl's, or I don't know what you guys have there, but if I go to a department store, if I go to Walmart or Target or something, I can buy the clothes and they fit me like they fit the mannequins. So I just buy off the shelf clothes, they fit me fine. Whereas a lot of people have a really difficult time finding it, or they have to do certain things, or they're always tucking in or pulling up. And so for me, being in a body like that, I find it really difficult to say, oh, well, just love your body and accept it the way it is, and that kind of a thing. And I kind of got off on a tangent there, but coming back to that, and so coming from that perspective, I often will help to try and get people to focus on, well, what are some low hanging fruit things that we could change? So you say, I need to start working out, and I need to eat less, and I need to do this. So I say, well, okay, aside from that, let's just say, what's something you could do that would be helpful to your body, might change the size, might not, but regardless of whether it does, it's going to help you as an individual. So are they completely sedentary, as an example? Well, if somebody's completely sedentary, they don't need to go to the gym 5 days a week to start seeing benefits. They need to find a way to be less sedentary. So instead of thinking, well, I got to cut out Netflix and I got to do this, well, why don't I go for a walk after dinner each night for 10 minutes? Or why don't I, some of the cliches, take the stairs at work instead of the elevator for one floor. Maybe you work on the fifth floor, 5 floors is too much. Take one flight of stairs, take the elevator from the second floor up to the fifth floor, or whatever. So find different ways to start moving more. Go to the gym 1 day a week. Will that work? Can you start there and just walk on the treadmill? All those kinds of things. And I think that finding the low hanging fruit like that can be really helpful. The same with eating. we want to go from 0 to 100 with our diet, but instead say, well, what are some things that what is it about your diet that you think is not particularly great? Obviously, you're coming to a nutrition coach for guidance, so you think you're not doing something right. So what do you think you're not doing right, or what do you think you could do better? And often I help them to understand that mentality of doing better, doing right is not a helpful place. But what are some things, what's your day look like? Well, I sometimes I eat breakfast, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't eat until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I find myself like going crazy in the evenings, just hitting the pantry over and over. So we look at that and we say, well, what's something that we could do slightly different? Can you try and eat something for breakfast each morning? That way you start the day off with some energy in your body, something simple like that. Can you have a consistent lunch time or range of times? Is there something like that? Can you give yourself a relatively structured meal and snack time schedule? Not a rigid one, but just, okay, I'm going to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner and a couple of snacks. And so each person's going to be in a different place with that. Some people are already eating 3 meals, but they've cut out snacks, or they're thinking of cutting out snacks. And it's like, well, no, why don't we just change those up a little bit? So anyway, finding the low-hanging fruit that you can address can be a really helpful place to start too, I think, because instead of focusing on these fitnessy kinds of things, and that can help get moving in the right direction with the intuitive eating things that are going to, that if you're doing something really, really wrong, like just way out there, and that's why your body is the size it is, whether it's too big or too small, or for your individual body, well, changing those things without focusing on your body size may result in those changes anyway. And so it can get a little sticky in there, I guess. And hopefully that wasn't too rambling, but
No, I think weight isn't a behavior, right?
Right.
That's kind of, what, in a roundabout way. It's we focus on behaviors that we actually have genuine kind of control over, if you'd like,
right,
which may or may not influence that outcome. And if somebody, and this is all about like a healthy approach, I think one of the misconceptions is with intuitive eating is like it's like actually just not caring. We were a very much and like I can't remember where it was like, intuitive eaters tend to have a lower BMI and things like that. They tend to kind of be healthier. They tend to be less food obsessed. They tend to, have better connection with with those around them and with their body and things like that. It's used within eating disorders as well, and it's got great benefits there. I think as well with what you were saying there, and this is a great thing for people to do who are like looking to start with intuitive eating, is like meeting you where you're at right now. And that's what I'll do with my clients is like, you said low hanging fruit there. It's like, well, what is just going to kind of move you along? And I'll always say it to my clients, it's like the least I do, the better. And it sounds like kind of such a backwards thing. And I'm like, listen, I call myself like a behavior change coach. I'm like, we're helping you change your behaviors. It says it right there on the tin. So like, if you do that yourself, like, and that's what in many ways you're paying me for. I'm a facilitator of change and how that change occurs and in the manner in which those changes occur. If the majority, if not all of that, just comes organically from yourself, well, what does that tell you? What does that give you? It gives you autonomy. It gives you competency. It gives you self-trust again. And this is the outcome. The diet culture, the diet world want you in it, right? They want to keep you there.
Yeah.
You know, they want return custom. So when you do, you learn to do this yourself, and you learn to navigate the nuances of the world. You find yourself in situations where in previous in the past, the diet just wouldn't work. It would fall to pieces because the rules just didn't align with what was going on. But when you have
Mm-hmm.
intuition, when you know yourself, when you understand how that relates to food, when you are genuinely like maybe educated, and that's like the last, you know, we've went from one extreme, the first, to the rejecting the diet mentality versus the last, which is focusing on the actual health and the nutrition and the, I call it the X's and O's, the
Mm-hmm.
Jeff and I went through our nutrition certification together, like, and we've made this transition to where we are right now, where like, how often do you talk about that little bit of nuance with nutrition, whereas you're
Yeah.
focusing on more of the internal dialogue of somebody and getting them to reconnect with their hunger signals, their emotional responses,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. So for me, like what you just said there earlier was like, yeah, like meeting them where they're at, like giving them what they need, and
Mm-hmm.
doing it at a pace that is genuinely like the right pace for them versus like
Yeah.
maybe every other diet is just like you flung in, and people automatically assume fast results, like i.e. results, weight loss
Mm-hmm.
equals success. And again, you've got to ask that question, well, where are you now? How did that work out for you in the long run?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one good, helpful mindset to have when getting started with intuitive eating is to take that additive approach. And I think that's kind of come up in both of our comments throughout here. Maybe not explicitly, but that general idea of adding things in rather than cutting them out. And I think that can be a really helpful mindset to go into it with and approach. And so adding in, like if your eating is chaotic, for example, and it's completely hit or miss over the course of most days, like you say, I can say that I usually eat breakfast about the same time. I usually have a snack around the same time each day, lunch around the same time, have a snack in the afternoon usually. I have dinner around the same time. I have something in the evening around, general ballpark. So there is a relative consistency to the way that I eat throughout the day. It's not a rigid rule. Sometimes I don't feel like my snack or whatever. That's fine. Sometimes I eat more, sometimes less. But, for someone, maybe your eating is completely chaotic. So instead of saying, well, we got to cut out the fast food, we got to cut out the late night snacking, we got to cut out this, we say, no, why don't we, instead of cutting anything out, why don't we just add some structure to the day? And it may be that you're able to add in a complete structure where it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a couple of snacks, or maybe it's just adding structure to one part. So I've had people who eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner fairly consistently, but they don't eat any snacks throughout the day. And so they find in the evening they're actually hungry when they start to realize that the late night snacking quote problem that they feel like they have is actually because they're hungry. And so the way that we address it is not by taking that away, but saying, well, what happens if you eat a snack in the morning between breakfast and lunch, or in the afternoon? What happens there? And they find out, yeah, I didn't have quite as much drive to eat later in the evening, and I felt much more controlled, or I was able to eat a snack that was more sustaining and more satisfying at that time, and I felt better going to bed, and all of those things. So adding rather than taking away, I think, can be a really good way to get started with intuitive eating, kind of that approach.
Mm.
And have you found that to be helpful too? I know one example that I had was somebody who really, for the most part, had their eating down pretty well. I put that in quotes again too, but they were saying, I eat too much fast food. I keep eating it like 4 or 5 times a week after school. They were a teacher, on their way home. Now, I don't even really like it that much, but I'm kind of in this habit. And so a natural thing for some people to do would be to say, well, just only eat it once a week or just cut that out. And it's the way we resolved the issue was we found out she wasn't eating enough during the day. And at that time in the day on her way home, she was starving. She was like really hungry and just couldn't wait to get home and wait for dinner. So we added a snack in the morning, like a snack that had protein, fat, and carbs in it. And that pretty much knocked out that issue. So it wasn't a issue that needed to be addressed with discipline or restriction. It was an issue that needed to be addressed with adding something else in.
And I think so many people forget that, you know, they require calories, they require food, they require energy. Even if they aren't considered like a very active individual, they still have this baseline need for food. And I think a lot of people therefore just go, oh, well, I don't move around a lot. Therefore, like, I don't need the food. And they get themselves to this position on an evening or later in the day where they're ravenous. And I found with so many people who, you know, are struggling with like emotional eating, binge eating, and things like that. Well, I think, right, my first port of call is like to get you to start honoring your biological needs. And usually straight away, like I would say probably 8 times out of 10, that like sorts that right out. And what they then realize, the emotion wasn't coming before, it was coming after.
Yeah. I've seen that a bunch of times too. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the emotional, the guilt, the shame was after they ate the abundance of food because they'd had the dinner. They'd maybe ate their quota, if you'd like. But they still got these drivers to eat. And almost that's like Pandora's box because it's the first time that they've not been busy, they've not been distracted, but all of that lag is just kind of caught up with them, if you'd like. And now they're in a position where, yes, they've ate, and potentially the lunch or the dinner, the evening meal that they've ate has been like from a diet mentality perspective. So it's just been like it's something on a small plate, and it's just not enough. And it's like it's maybe a lean protein, bit vegetables, you know, maybe a little bit of carbs, but you don't want too many of them, right? You know, so like there's always that like kind of them conditions, and obviously the maybe through the day or chronically as well, just cutting out dietary fat. And dependent on how long this has gone for, it usually results in them raiding the biscuit tin and things like that. So we need to get some sort of we need to get the body and the brain like into this like established state where it's like, right, actually I'm not in a starved position and I'm not planning on doing so as well. So that like dieting mentality thing comes back. Is like you're not almost going, right, I'm going to start on Monday. So you've already planted the seed that you're already going to be cutting out X, Y, and Z. So depending on what day it is, that is Wednesday. We're recording this, you know, that's what 4 days of like, right, getting it out your system, getting what you need. And because your brain is predicting it because that's its job. And so it's predicting that you are going to be in a famished state. So let's hoard, let's get it in, let's get it out of our system. And then usually it's by the next Wednesday that they've kind of, or something's happened because they're on they're hyper vigilant to the foods around them. Something will, you know, present itself. They'll break, they'll make it, you know, they'll fail. And that's the thing with intuitive eating. And the thing that I always like reiterate with clients is like, this is not a pass fail thing. This isn't a right or wrong. This isn't a good or bad, you know, and that's the language that you've internalized through dieting is like, it's not the diet's fault. It's your fault. You're not good enough. You've got no discipline. You've got no willpower. I was like, whoa, like, you've never actually thought of turn around and go, these diets are really, really, you know, crap. With intuitive eating, I just say there's no rules. That's the fantastic thing. And you can start to then for regulate based on all of the things that you want to do rather than the things that you should do. And also you get to start to trust your body again and the signals that it's presenting itself. And if you miss meals and you get overly hungry, you kind of know. It's not about, like the and it's often like it's less consistent, that happens less consistently, and you know obviously what to do about it, and you understand the feelings and where they are coming from, rather than it being a question of discipline and willpower. You
Yeah.
actually start to go, yeah, actually, like, I haven't ate enough. So you start to really kind of see this as a constant continuum rather than a genuine thing. Because I think as we grow, as we age, as we develop, as our values potentially change, intuition stays forever, and you can therefore flex it a little bit and negotiate and move. Whereas with diets, they're just so rigid.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned eating enough, and that's interesting. I'd like to maybe talk about that a little bit, because that's one of the things that you hear a lot of people in the non-diet space say, for people, that they often say, "Hey, your issue is you're not eating enough." But then a person coming into it, they're like, "But maybe they're in a very large body, and they're thinking to themselves, how can you say I'm not eating enough? Or how can another person say the issue is that you're not eating enough?" And it's an interesting kind of a thing to think about, and I think that can be something that's really helpful with when you're first starting out. If you're going into it with this mindset, you're thinking, maybe you're in a larger body, and maybe you haven't always been. Maybe normally you've been in a smaller body, and now you've found yourself in a larger body. And so you know that there's been some disruptions that have maybe kind of resulted in that. How do we get started if somebody is thinking, "Oh, how can you say I'm not eating enough?" And I think that's an interesting thing. How do you approach that if somebody comes to you and you're telling them you're not eating enough? How do you clarify that, I guess, would be a better way of putting that. What does it mean to say to somebody you're not eating enough, and that's the issue?
I think if we go back to our nutrition certifications and all that, and all of the kind of the PubMeds, which often like the studies that are put in a vacuum, if you'd like, and they talk about like, right, if calories are equated, if the results are the same. So we compare fasters versus just people who distribute their calories, but I think they are trying to like just prove the point that energy balance is like the most important factor. We can't ignore thermodynamics, but how somebody regulates calories like is very different.
Yeah.
And also like people tend to look at that bit of the study, not like say if they did take hunger scores. And it's like, right, but if this was real life and these people were in like, real normal living situations rather than being paid money to live in this kind of these confines, and being told exactly. And it's like, well, where are they now? And what were the after effects of the people that maybe did the fasting?
Right.
So when it comes to like people not eating enough and like they're in a bigger body, so they are maybe, and they are constantly still putting on weight, so they present to be
Yeah.
in a caloric surplus. And it's like, well, we need to clearly regulate appetite a lot more effectively. And that will give that person the illusion that they are eating more. And they may eat more physically, but they may eat less calorically. Because if they are getting to the point where they are just starving, they may eat, like, for example, I don't know, a pizza, a whole pizza. But like that's like maybe just one sitting for them.
Yeah.
Versus if we're asking them to have 3 or 4 sittings, in their mind's eye, they are eating more.
Right.
But by eating more, though, they are eating less. So it's kind of,
Right.
and I think there's a lot of fear there because people just have associated eating with weight gain or eating with negativity.
Right.
And I think there's still fear there lingering that if they start eating breakfast, the big question is, but what if I keep overeating on a night?
Yeah.
And I'm like, try it. like you know,
Yeah.
like play. I'm like this. I'm like, play with this. Have fun with this. Like,
Yeah.
mess about for once in your lifetime. Just like try, get excited
Hmm.
with food, experiment with food. And I think and habitualizing food as well. Big part of it is make peace with food. Is like right, like actually learning to have I don't know, bread. Some people are like, oh, I can't eat bread. Get bread out my sight. It's like, well, actually, if you have a couple of slices a day, if you have a sandwich, I don't know, are you guys big on sandwiches? We love a sandwich
Oh
in
yeah. Yeah. I
yeah,
am personally, I would eat it for lunch and dinner every day. And I'd eat a
yeah.
breakfast sandwich for breakfast. If yeah,
But
I love them.
people are like, I can't eat bread, but they're between like cutting it out completely or eating an entire loaf a day.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, can't you just have a sandwich? Like,
Yeah.
and it's just like, but again, we're in such people saying you can't lose fat whilst eating
Uh-huh.
carbs, and insulin's the devil, and so many people have got so many mixed messages. I just think they've lost so much confidence with eating. So when you're actually telling or asking somebody to do something that is surrounded by fear, like asking them potentially to start eating more carbohydrates as well,
Hmm.
so they've got decent brain function and decent
Yeah.
decent appetite regulation, and if they're physically active also decent performance and recovery levels. So
Hmm.
I think you've got to ask people, again, go back to what I said earlier, is put a lot of trust in themselves and potentially, if they're working with a coach, in that coach. But if they've had maybe 30, 40 years of like evidence suggesting that they can't do that, then you are again asking them to take a big emotional risk. But
Yeah.
because you've worked with so many people, and as have I, those that genuinely come out the other side, like are like, wow, it's transformative.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's kind of what I think is important to bring up. That when we say you're not eating enough, it's often you're not eating enough consistently, which is resulting in eating too much habitually, collectively, for your body. And I think that's one of the issues that a lot of people run into. And it's amazing how some of these small things that we were talking about kind of earlier on, finding some low hanging fruit, some simple habits, some simple, uh, relatively straightforward things that you can start implementing, adding in rather than taking things out, that can have a downstream effect on getting that desired result in, which is to eat the amount of food that's right for your body and your level of physical activity and those kinds of things. Because ultimately, that's what we want to do. That's ultimately what intuitive eating is supposed to help you do, is to help you eat the amount of food that's going to be right for you. That doesn't mean that some days you won't eat more than what you need or less than what you need. But what we're saying is, in general, overall, that when you get to this place where you're listening to your body, that and have kind of these things in place that will help support that, that you'll end up eating the amount that is right for you. And sometimes that means eating, quote, more, but by more, we don't mean more overall. We mean more consistently, more throughout the day, so that at the end of the day, when you do go ahead and order a pizza, you're able to eat 2 or 3 or 4 slices instead of the entire thing, because you're not so ravenous. And that's what we find with, and why the honor your hunger and feel your fullness principles are important is that and when we have that consistency, it's much easier to honor your hunger and feel your fullness, because when you go into a meal with a moderate level of hunger, where you're like, yeah, I'm hungry, I'm ready to eat, versus, oh, I cannot wait, I'm starving to eat. It's so much easier to say, oh, I'm full, I've had enough. But when you go into it starving, you eat, and it takes a while for those signals to tell you that you're full and that you had enough. And so it's much easier to then overeat at that meal. And so again, eating more in general, overall, consistently, can really help you to eat. And I hate to say eat less, because that's not really the goal, but to eat the amount that is right for the individual. And I think that's an important distinction too. And in all of this is, I think if you're just starting out, going into it with the mindset that, you know what, I want to learn through intuitive eating to eat the amount of food that's right for me, rather than going in and saying, I want to learn intuitive eating so that I can eat less. And some people may say, oh, that's just semantics. And it's like, no, it's actually a very, very different mindset to go into it with, is this idea of eating less versus eating the amount that's going to serve me the best. And if you can shift your mindset, and that's kind of where the rejected diet mentality is instead of saying, I need to do something to get this weight off, or I need to do something to lose weight, say, I need to do some things that is going to serve my body well, that's going to help me with the health concerns that I may have, that's going to help with the energy levels that I feel I'm lacking, or whatever. As part of that process, I might lose weight, I might gain weight, I might build muscle, I might, whatever the case may be. But going into it with that seems subtle difference in mindset, but it's really a dramatic difference in mindset, can be really helpful when you're first starting off. And it can really help you to implement those principles and actually have those principles work together. Because when you go into it with the wrong mindset, it can completely interfere with trying to implement those principles. As an example, hunger, fullness, and satisfaction, those are three of the principles. If you're going into it with the mindset that I'm going to try, I need to use intuitive eating to help me eat less because I'm eating too much. It's like, maybe you are eating too much overall, but going into it with the mindset of, I want to eat the right amount versus I want to eat less, means that when you go in to hunger and fullness, you're saying, how hungry am I? Am I full? Versus trying to trick yourself into thinking you're hungry, thinking you're full. Satisfaction. Was that really satisfying? Or was that Halo Top really satisfying? Was it a true replacement for real ice cream? Or am I just trying to convince myself of that? And that's the difference in how we go into intuitive eating. So if we go into it with the mindset that I'm going to eat the amount that is right for me, then you'll notice that Halo Top is not as satisfying as real ice cream. But you'll also find, I don't have to eat a half a gallon of ice cream to be satisfied. I'm actually fine with a scoop when I allow myself to enjoy it, and I don't beat myself up for eating real Ben and Jerry's ice cream, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And like, listen, we're coming up on time, but like something really jumped out at me is like, we've said it ourselves, like low hanging fruit. But like, if you ever actually defined what you mean by that, because somebody might be going out going, oh, I'm going to get some apples from that tree over there that is hanging low, so when with intuitive eating, it's us like working in your world and helping you understand and redefine things, and like potentially you might hear something and it might become misconstrued, or you might not fully understand it. When we say low hanging fruit, we're like, the easy things, the easy options, rather than getting your ladder out and going at the top of the tree, just get the stuff that's there in front of you. And then as you develop confidence, you can start going up those rungs. But with this, so many people have collected so much evidence and associations to certain words, and things and phrases. And I like the intuitive eating stuff because it's almost just giving people that complete blank canvas. And so many people that I work with, including myself, are big foodies. You know, we're often talking about all of the amazing foods, because you said there about satisfaction. And for me, that's one of the most important things. It's like my diet is for life. Like, you know what? And I want to experience different cultures. I want to eat what I want, and as much of it as that I want. But again, there's an interpretation there that people may be going, oh God, like this guy eats what he wants, and they fear that like eating what you want translates to like eating infinite gargantuan amount of foods. Well, actually, that wouldn't be a very satisfying experience, would it? You know, Christmas dinner, fullness all the time. So we can see how certain principles start to like play into one another. And it's very much about gaining that experience. That's the most important thing. And I'll always say it to people, like, the important thing is that you start. And you know, and we can leave this episode with that, is like, you know, it's not about being a perfectionist, which most diets kind of breed. It's about going, okay, then this is where I'm at. You know, I want to start this, you know, and I think that's an opportunity for people to reach out. Or, you know, I'm sure, Jeff, you've got resources which we'll have a conversation about, and we'll put in show links. I've got like a little diet scorecard people can fill in as well. And it's just about beginning that process and creating that awareness, and listening to conversations about this that we've, you know, went on for nearly an hour talking about, and I feel like we haven't even scratched the surface.
I know. Yeah, I know. That's the thing with these things. It's curiosity. I mean, I think that's a key thing. Is I think that's a good way to summarize kind of what we're talking about, is give yourself the permission to be curious from a non-judgmental perspective. Give yourself permission to say, you know, I'm going to try this and see what happens. Maybe I'm going to overeat and go wild, but maybe I'm not, or maybe I'm going to. But in that experience, what can you learn from it? So it's a shift. Instead of saying, well, I overate, I got to get back on track. Instead of saying, I overate, I wonder what's going on there. I wonder why I did that. I didn't feel very good with that. Is there something I can do to come at this the next time that this kind of situation presents itself, so that I leave feeling physically better? And again, it's that mindset shift of saying, I got to fix this. I'm broken, versus, I didn't like how that felt. I don't want to feel like that. So what can I do what would help me to go into that experience again next time and come out the other end feeling better?
Perfect, man. I think that's perfect to end on. And yeah, like, go to the show notes, subscribe to all of our podcasts, and hook us up, share it about, you know what I mean? That's why we're doing this kind of doubler, if you'd like. We're on one another's podcast because we just want to be super helpful and get people to start being a bit more curious and explore, like, what has potentially just been lost and deconditioned out of them that was there from a child. We were born intuitive eaters, and you can get that back even in this kind of food environment. So yeah, man, a big thank you, Jeff. Always a pleasure, and I'm sure we're going to have more of these there.
Yeah, thank you. It's always it's basically recording two friends having a conversation, which is kind of cool. So I always enjoy doing these kinds of things, and so yeah, good. I'm glad you thought of this idea.
Cheers, man. Thanks a lot, bud.
Thank you for listening to the Better You podcast. If you've taken a huge amount of value from this, which I'm absolutely sure you have, please share it around. Send it to a friend, send it to a family member, even a colleague. Remember, building the best possible version of you is going to be 100 times easier if those around you are trying to do the same themselves. If you would like an additional bit of help, support, guidance and accountability, you can just reach out to me. My website is buildwithbickle.com, or you can send an email, ian@buildwithbickle.com. Also, share the podcast on social media, tag me in it, I would hugely appreciate that. Thank you again.